Welcome, everybody. I am Debbie Fink, and I am the Director of Community Outreach and Impact for Respectability. And we are thrilled to have you here today, both in person as well as live on the webinar. And thank you to our interpreters who are interpreting for those watching on the webinar. So on behalf of Respectability, I want to thank you all for coming out to our training for mothers of students with disabilities. We are thrilled to have all of you here. This is the third of our 6 trainings that are part of our Women's Disability Leadership, Inclusion, and Advocacy series. And it means so much to us that you're here for this. So I want to get started with saying it takes a village to educate a child. We've all heard that phrase, right? And I want to start with some participatory research. So it's voluntary. You don't have to participate. But I would like you to raise your hand if the question applies to you. And webinar folks, feel free to raise your hands as well. So my first question is, how many of you have a boy with a disability? Okay, thank you. How many of you have a girl with a disability? Okay, thank you. How many of you have more than one child with a disability? Thank you. Next question. How many of you have a preschooler with a disability? Okay. How many of you have an elementary schooler with a disability? How many of you have a middle schooler with a disability? How many of you have a high schooler with a disability? And how many of you have an adult child with a disability? Okay, so I would say, help me out here if you looked around at the answers, that the majority of you here have a boy with a disability. And in terms of age range, I think high school had the most hands up, no? Let's see for elementary school again. Okay, and high school. Okay, so just so we have a sense for who's in the room and where we are in the stage of development with our kids. So thank you for that. So I have to say that our goals for today are to help provide tools to further your empowerment. First, to take charge advocating for your child. Second, to take charge caring for yourself. Third, to take action in New York City's civic life. And fourth, to meet new mothers on a similar journey and cultivate new relationships. And I am now so pleased to hand the mic to one of Respectability's executive committee members. Vivian Bass is a woman who has been leading the way for people with disabilities for decades and working tirelessly to empower women and girls by ensuring and protecting their physical safety and economic security. It is a privilege to have Vivian here with us today.
Thank you, Debbie. Good afternoon. Yesterday, March 8th, was International Women's Day. I can't think of a better way to honor this day than to be gathered together today among women and mothers, doing what we do best, empowering one another to advocate and become better advocates for our nation's children. We are here with much thanks to so many in our village. Thanks to Guttman Community College and its accessibility services for hosting us yet again. Thanks to the many organizations listed for collaborating with Respectability. And deepest gratitude to New York Women's Foundation and the Coca-Cola Foundation for generously supporting this effort. Before we watch a powerful short film called Ian, I want to draw our attention to our disclaimer on the screen.
And we can turn the lights out for the film. Thank you.
Now, a powerful, wordless, 10-minute animated film based on a true story created in Argentina by director Abel Goldfarb and written and produced by Gaston Gurali. It is a universal story of a child with a disability and his mother. Let's watch it together now. So now, without further ado, let's turn off our cell phones and begin what I have every sense will be a memorable afternoon. Thank you. truly powerful, and so much to discuss. I now want to turn today over to my fellow board member, Gabby Einstein-Sims, who will moderate our most outstanding panel. Parent Advocacy, Victories from the Past, Navigating the Present, and Advancing the Future. Gabby is pursuing her master's degree at Teachers College, Columbia University. Her fieldwork included working with schools and educators in District 75 to bring nutrition education programs to their students.
Thank you, Vivian. And once again, welcome everyone. We're so happy to see you all. So you've just experienced a powerful film together. I'd like to turn to each of my three panelists to get their responses to Ian. I want to approach this through the lens of our past, present, and future. Hi, Donna. Thank you for joining us today.
Sure.
You are a self-proclaimed history wonk and CEO of the National Association of Councils on Developmental Disabilities. I'd like to ask you to give us a synopsis of Ian filtered through the past. What disability advocacy had to be in place for this film to even be in existence today?
Well, thank you, Gabby. First of all, I think it's a beautiful film. I don't know how you all felt about it. I've watched it several times now, and of course I choke up every time. But I'm also, I'm a mom, and so anytime I see something like that, it makes me want to cry. But this film makes me cry in a beautiful way, because what I see is how far we've come. I don't want to go into too much detail, because otherwise I won't have a presentation to give in a few minutes. But, our history in disability in this country is actually very short. We think that things are all in place right now, but really it's only been in about the last 50 so years that we have made great strides and great changes for how children are included in school, how we believe everybody should be included, fully included in our communities, people with disabilities are in our workforce, and valued players. It took a lot for us to get here. So I think when I look at this film and I see this playground, I see this young child struggling, what I think is, I'm so happy that it's different today. Once upon a time, that child would not have even been in that playground. He would have been in an institution or would have been at home but hidden behind doors. So I'm glad he's out on the playground.
Absolutely. Thank you, Donna. We look forward to hearing from you more about some past victories. Next, moving on to Michelle. Thank you for joining us today. As the Director of Social Work for Children for Gender Equity, I'd like to ask you to share your thoughts on Ian through the present tense. What universal attitudes exist among students and their educators today for this situation to occur?
Okay. The first thing I want to say is Girls for Gender Equity. That's our organization.
I'm so sorry.
It's 100% fine. Okay.
What did I say?
And children, but it's okay because we're talking about children. Great. I think in that question you asked for what is the universal perspective, and I actually unfortunately think part of the present is that we don't have a universal perspective on accessibility that is accessible to everyone. A lot of the schools in which I have worked in and had the privilege of being able to partner with are in communities where the playground isn't even accessible for any student when we talk about safety and community. So what I think is a general conversation around students needing to be able to have their basic needs met at school, no matter who you are, is what we're looking at right now in this moment in education, and also thinking about the fact that we have come a long way in accessibility and accessible playgrounds, and that still isn't available to a vast majority of students and young people in this country.
Thank you for that. We look forward to hearing some more from you later. And now our third panelist, Nell. Hi, Nell. Thank you for joining us. We're so happy to be seeing you today. Hi. As a self-advocate, CEO of the Will to Win Ministry, and godmother of a child with a disability, can you address Ian through the future tense? As we envision a future of acceptance and inclusion for Ian and all the other children with disabilities worldwide, what do you think is the most important action that we need to implement?
Well, thank you. Hi again, everyone. I really appreciate his strength, first of all, and his tenacity to really take a stand. That's number one. I'm looking at it in the future as a universal perspective where the school, I think, has to take a stand now to educate the students, first of all, in accessibility, in disability, because obviously all the kids are just laughing at him, no one is actually even going and showing even empathy. So the children need, first of all, to be taught about disability. And I think it should come from a school's perspective, not just a home or a family perspective, but an entire school perspective. The school needs to find solutions for inclusion for kids like Ian, where he could be included in the playground activities. The barriers need to come down. The barriers need to come down so he can actually, show what he has. He has abilities and talent, and he wants to be inclusive and be able to play with all the other kids. So the barriers need to come down, and that has to come from a school's perspective. Another thing I would look at, the school needs more inclusion programs. They need to have inclusion where disability history is taught to all of the students. Able-bodied students, students with disability, they all need to be included. And so that will therefore promote an environment where everyone can thrive, including the children with disabilities. And we need to all be educated. All be educated. The children need to be educated, parents need to be educated, the schools need to be educated, and therefore they will send all of those education and bring everyone inclusive and have an inclusive environment where Ian can thrive and he can grow and, be loving and be able to promote. Katrina is my goddaughter. She's here today. And, when we had Katrina, she wasn't able to speak at all. She wasn't speaking at all. And so we were able to speak to her and encourage her, and here she is today. She's Miss Wheelchair New York 2018.
That's great. Thank you so much. We look forward to hearing from you. And thank you to all of our panelists for your keen insight on Ian. Before we dive into our panel some more, I just wanted to let everyone know that there is paper on your tables, I believe. So we're going to have a question and answer portion at the end of the panel. So if you have any questions that occur to you, please write them down, and hopefully the panelists will be able to answer. Now before...
I'll just say, looking around, the note cards didn't make it, so you could write it in your little notepad and rip it out.
Okay. Panelists, I wanted to let you know that Candace over here is our timekeeper. So keep a lookout for her to get an idea of how much time you have left. She will ring the bell when you're out. So, kind of like the Oscars, Okay, let's dive into our panel. Let's turn the clock back in time, Donna. Can you please give us a whirlwind history on disability advocacy, sharing with us America's history from the past?
I would be happy to. Thank you. Are you running slides for me?
Yes.
Yes. Oh, how nice. Thank you. I'm used to doing my own, But I hope you all don't mind if I stand up, because I'm more comfortable when I kind of walk around a little bit and talk with you, and I'm going to keep my eye on you because I'm probably going to go over and you're going to cut me off like I'm at the Oscars, so that's great. Thank you all for being here. You've taken an incredible step in the right direction today by being here and coming together. It's so powerful to see so many moms and a few gentlemen joining us as well. I think that's really great because this, it does take a family. It takes a village to support a child, a sibling, a family member. I am also a parent as well as a professional. I was a professional first, and so when my son started to present with some things, I was right on it. And the funny part was I would have these people at school say, have you ever thought about being an advocate? I didn't tell them what I did in my real life until I really had to, and then that became, yes, Mrs. Meltzer, we'll get on that right away. So I shared a few people. So that was kind of fun. What I really did want to talk about today, as Gabby said, is just a little bit of the history. You know, our country has I'm going to say not so long history in terms of providing laws across our land that really make full inclusion possible, that really looks at disability as a natural part of the human existence. And so what I do want to do is a little whirlwind tour, as Gabby said, of a couple of pieces of legislation that I think are important for you all to know, because I know when you leave this room today, you're going to go back to your lives, but you're going to be in those schools, you're going to be in your communities, maybe some of you will be going to the State House or even coming to Washington, D.C., and as you're thinking about your daily lives, you're going to need to know a little bit about some of these pieces of legislation that really have shaped how we look at disability today. And as a parent, you need to know what some of those laws are, what are your rights, but also what are your responsibilities. So that's really important. So just as a little reminder, you know, our government works on 3 different branches. We have our executive branch, that is the White House and our federal agencies. We have the legislative branch, which is Congress, that is the House of Representatives and the Senate, and we have the judicial branch, which is our court system. All 3 are really important when we're talking about disability policy and how we can shape things. So, for example, many programs will get their funding through the legislative branch. Congress appropriates money, but it's the federal agencies that shape what that law is going to look like. Like we take something like education, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we get funding from Congress, and then through the executive branch, we have the Department of Education, right? And they shape how that law is going to look and how it's going to play out in every state and territory of our country and in every district for education. So it's really important that all of these branches of our government are engaged. And when there's problems, guess where it all ends up? It goes to the courts, right? And sometimes that's where we have to settle things. So there are a couple of pieces of legislation that I want to briefly touch on today. And when I said a short history, what I really want to take you back to is thinking about that most of our disability policy has only emerged over the last 50 to 60 years. And when you think about it in terms of our nation's history of, you know, almost 300 years, that's not very far. It's within our lifetimes that we know people with disabilities were either put into institutions or were kept maybe at home, but didn't really go out into the community, certainly weren't educated. They didn't have the rights and the opportunities that our kids today have, and we're very grateful that they have those today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what those pieces of legislation are, if I could have the next slide. So going back to the 1960s, you might know that in the early 60s, our president was John Kennedy. And President Kennedy had a sister, Rosemary, who had what was then called mental retardation. We don't use that terminology anymore, but today we would call that an intellectual disability. And so the Kennedy family had a very profound desire to really understand disability more and to do something about it. And so a bill was developed. The original name was not, I'm already, oh, thank God.
No, you're good. That was me.
Okay. So the original name of that bill that came about under President Kennedy was not the Developmental Disabilities Assistance and Bill of Rights Act. The name was changed a few years later, but it really was started to look deeply into disability. Really, it was about building research components to understand where does disability come from? What are some of those causes? Are there cures for particular disabilities? And for people who have disabilities, how do we give them the best life? What kind of medical care might they need? What else do they need from the community to make their lives successful? And so 3 different programs over the course of 10 or so years came together in what is now known as the Developmental Disabilities Act. The program that I work for is one of those 3. So those 3 components are the University Centers for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. There's 3 of those here in New York, one that's in Manhattan and 2 that are in other parts of the state. And they're really looking at research. They are training people who are going to work in the field to go out to communities And for many families, that USID is the first place that after a child is born and starts presenting with some kind of disability, and parents don't know, do I need a diagnosis? What do I need to know? What should I learn? That might be the first place where they're getting sort of this wraparound services and understanding of where to go. The Developmental Disabilities Councils, which is who I work for, came into being in 1970 when the movement was really changing, and we were moving more away from a medical model and into understanding that people with all kinds of developmental disabilities, all kinds of disabilities, really need to have a say in their own lives, and how do they want to see their communities work. And so this system of 56 state and territorial councils was put into law. Every state and territory has this council. The council is made up of people who have developmental disabilities or family members. They respond to the state's governor, and they tell the governor, this is what we want and this is what we need. And they get to shape policy. And then the third component are the protection and advocacy agencies. They're the people who help you know your rights and your responsibilities. Many of you may have already had some connection with a protection and advocacy agency if you had issues in your school. Next slide, please. Then came in 1972, and then eventually 1975 was the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. That's probably what you guys know most about because you're parents and you're working in the school system. And we'll have some time later today in our tables to talk a little bit about, like, what does an IEP look like? Do you have an IEP, or does your child need a 504 plan? What's the difference? How do we have all of those things? But that really started with some parents who were really adamant that their children deserve the same level of education as any other child. And through a series originally called the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, we now today have the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Of all pieces of legislation, as a parent, this is the one you probably will want to know most about. Next slide, please. We also in the 1970s had the Section 504 that was passed. That's the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which states that no qualified individual with a disability in the United States shall be excluded from, denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity that either receives federal financial assistance or is conducted by any executive agency. This was really impactful. This was really one of the first pieces of legislation where individuals with disabilities, this is a nice picture in front of the White House in Washington, D.C. The lady sitting with the big card in front of her is Judy Heumann. Judy Heumann is a New Yorker, a woman with a disability, originally started her career wanting to be a teacher. She was shut out from the New York school system because she had a disability. She later became the Assistant Secretary of Education for our country. And she is a top disability advocate and somebody I'm proud to call a friend as well. We've often lobbied together. But your schools receive federal funding. Any entity in your state, in your communities that receives federal funding, this is the commitment that says it has to be accessible and open to all. Next slide, please. Last, I just want to share a little bit about the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was passed in 1990, signed into law by President Bush. I'm sure you guys know a little bit about this piece of legislation. It really is such an important piece of legislation. It is very deep, it is very detailed, and it was a long time in coming. It is fascinating that for so many years we had civil rights laws, but the disability population was not included. Senator Harkin, who was one of the main champions in the Senate for this bill, called this bill the Emancipation Proclamation. It really is something that has changed our nation. And that's why I wanted to point out to you, look, it was only in 1990. So very recent history. We have only had this law with us for 28 years, and yet it made a huge difference. And it is based on 4 major pillars: that all people deserve full participation in the community, that all people deserve independent living and the opportunity to live where they want, with whom they want, and how they want. Your children are all going to be products of this law. Equality of opportunity. That means no matter what our disability, we should have equal opportunities to pursue our dreams and live our lives. And economic self-sufficiency. That means we should be able to work and earn money, be able to live the lives we choose. I want to finish with this last thought for all of you. All of these laws have common language. and they were built upon one another. It was by design. They all have interlocking language that supports and makes up different parts of what we do within the disability community. Each plays a role in our rights and our responsibilities and helps us know what we can do and what we can achieve. What I really want you to know is that while your life day in and day out probably feels very challenging on many days, I know that, I feel that, I've been there too, but you're standing on the shoulders of giants. There are amazing people that for decades really worked to get each of those laws into place so that all of our kids today benefit from them. We are living in a better place. It doesn't make life easy. It doesn't make our world perfect. We are living in a time where we have a lot of our great disability policies constantly challenged, but you are the advocates now. You're out there advocating for your kids, and there's nothing more powerful than that. So be one of those giants. Be the best parent you can be. Hook up with other parents. Your voices are very, very powerful. As an advocate and somebody who brings advocates together, I will tell you there are policymakers at all levels, your local level, your state level, and I was going to say up in Washington, down in Washington. I'm up north now, I'm from Washington, but they listen to you because you are the people that they represent, and that's the most important thing. So thank you for your attention to this today.
Thank you, Donna. That was a wonderful little history lesson.
Really brief.
And learning about that policy is definitely really helpful. So next, Michelle. You clearly live in the present, passionately working with girls and students with disabilities in the New York City school system. Can you please help us navigate the present as parent advocates?
Happy to. Hi, y'all. Hey. I am Michelle Greer. I am a born and raised Brooklynite, grown and raised in the city, and also a social worker who has been practicing in the city for, I think 10 years, but has been doing social justice work for a long time. And so I was asked to speak on the panel. Usually I am asked to speak about gender-based violence and the impact of racism. However, because of my experiences as a school social worker working with so many different people, was asked to speak a little bit about the present and what it looks like within our school system, and my experience really partnering with parents. Parents are always advocates, right? Y'all know and I mean parents in the largest form, so whether that's grandparents, whether that's aunties and uncles that have taken positions on raising people, the neighbor next door that's taken in, right, multiple people. That's sort of what it looks like in my experience for New York City and who's helping to raise our children. In addition, what really hit me in the film is that I think there's so much isolation that happens when you are experiencing discrimination, no matter what that discrimination is, and in addition, the impact of disability discrimination. And so needing to have support and also make awareness at the same time is what really impacted me about that film. Was that when we come together, it's like the isolation. I think there's a lot of isolation happening in this country right now. So, that's me. And the next one. We don't have to see me. I'm right here. Where are we today? So what I thought I would do is, I'm not a researcher. Like I said, I'm a social worker, and what I have to do is probably what many of you do, which is go to other people for the resources, for the information. And so have y'all heard of the Research Alliance for New York City Schools? Any of y'all? They came out with a great article in 2018 around their research. They've done a whole study of the city and what's going on. So what I'm going to do is give you some information on what we're seeing right now in New York City schools around specifically IEPs. So understanding that New York City schools have 1.1, million students. We are the largest school district in the country. We are the most segregated school district in the country. We have 200,000 students with IEPs. That's not including 504 plans, and that's not including all the students who haven't been identified, for support. And so I'm going to give you a little bit of information specifically on students who have been identified as having those IEPs right now. So forgive me if this does not also cover the private school spectrum, but this right now will include charter school spectrum, public education as in what we call DOE schools, magnet schools, and any students potentially who went through that system and then were transferred into private school. Okay, so I'm going to get the highlights and then I'll go into detail. So the percentage of students with IEPs varies across the country. We have the most students with IEPs the percentage of IEPs varies throughout New York City, and we have the highest number of students with IEPs in the country. And what I mean by that is that even though we have the highest number of IEPs, it's not consistent throughout our district, right? So one of the highest places in where there are IEPs is in Harlem, in the city, and one of the lowest areas where there are IEPs is on the Upper East Side. And so when we're talking about who is getting identified and what's happening, we have to be thinking about where this is happening in terms of location, right? The most prevalent disability classifications are learning disabilities and speech or language impairments. What we know based on that is that most students who are coming into this country as immigrants, so when we're talking about Latinx students, and when we are talking about those who are identified as Asian and Asian American students, that we see that they are having higher rates of IEPs within New York City. And that's because they're coming in with an ESL, right? So they're being diagnosed with needing to have language supports, but coming in with an IEP. And IEPs do protect students, right? We understand that, saying that there is something that they need, and also understanding that IEPs have been a part of tracking within New York City schools. Okay. So the next statistic. Boys are more likely to be classified with autism, emotional disturbance, and other health impairments. Have y'all heard that before?
Yes.
Right? So what does that mean for girls?
Late.
It's late, right? They're not seen. One of the experiences I would have going into the classroom with teachers was, oh, your student's not doing work. Oh, but she sits there and she's quiet and she listens to everything I say, right? And needing to train teachers on how to be able to identify how girls present within the classroom. That's not a conversation that we're having. People automatically are identifying those who are disrupting the classroom. But if you're in compliance, that's not a conversation that's happening. So invisibility, and our girls are getting lost within the system. So that's also the lower number across the board. We're going to see always higher percentages of boys and lower percentages with girls. And I know that we spoke about that in the beginning, but really understanding what that looks like, even when teachers are in the classroom and they might be having this experience every single day with your child. Disability classifications also vary substantially by race and ethnicity, which I think was clear when I said Harlem versus, right, the Upper East Side. However, we have to be really intentional about what that means, because then it also goes into the classification. I'm trained as a mental health clinician. So when I learned classifications, it was under the DSM, which is a diagnostic tool for mental health. When I came into the school system, I started reading IEPs, and they would say emotional disturbance. And I was like, this isn't a classification that carries over into the mental health world, right? So a child who maybe has experienced multiple traumas, or is living in an environment where they need more support, or was just transferred to a shelter system, or maybe doesn't know how to communicate their needs and is acting out, is then given an emotional disturbance classification, which coincides with poverty and race a lot of the time, versus saying we have trauma that needs to be dealt with, and the school needs to have a trauma-informed lens because we know there's more trauma happening within this school district. So these are some of the happenings that are occurring in New York City right now. I didn't want to spend too much time on my data points, but those are like the top ones. What I did do, can we go to the next slide, please, is I put the research up here. And I will say it again, the Research Alliance for New York City Schools, they have great graphics. They have it all broken down in terms of really more stats, if you wanted to look for your neighborhood or things like that. Because they're the experts in this, I wanted to share some of my experiences and also be able to hear from y'all if y'all have questions around what it looks like to be in schools. I know that there are a mix of people here and would love to speak to the different experiences, Additionally, I put Include NYC up here. I know that they are a partner with Respectability. For me, as a social worker coming into the school, as well as when I was working in foster care, they were one of the major parts of being able to support me in my work with parents. And I think that this is where we are in this present moment, is that we have some really amazing organizations that have access to resources and who are really working within communities to build that out. I worked in East New York. There were not resources for families who had students with autism. If you wanted to go to a place to have a recreational center, you had to go to downtown Brooklyn, which was 45 minutes away from that neighborhood. These centers are saying we need to be making more spaces within community in order to allow for students to have that accessibility, and also they're working with parents to make sure that we have funding, right? To make sure that people are going up to Albany, to make sure, thank you, I'm taking so long, I'm sorry. The other thing I will say is that for those of you who are in the school community, you have to understand your social location when you're walking in the door of that school. And I'm really speaking to Black and brown moms right now, and dads. There is a history of calling the mom first in schools that teachers do. It's sort of the way that has always been taught. And also sometimes thinking that the father's the disciplinary, which can also lead to certain things that access ACS in situations where a school thinks that because a child is having a certain issue, that, I will just be blunt. I have had experiences where students need more, parents need help and resources. And because it's seen that the parent is being neglectful, ACS is called. And a lot of that has to do with social location, not understanding why a parent is doing more and understanding what the parent is going through. And so if you can find an ally in the school who can help to speak to those people for you and translate, because a lot of this is translation and being able to build relationships, I think that that is one of the biggest things that you can do in the school community, because a lot of times there's a lot of misconception and thinking that people understand one another's experience when really we're not talking to each other because we've been in isolation for so long as a country. And so we're not just talking across barriers of disability, but also talking about race, class, sexism, and how that impacts your children and disability. So thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. That was some really, really interesting information and also some good resources. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions when we do the roundtables. Next, Nell. You are really focused on helping families see and seek a brighter future in the midst of chaos. Can you please address how we can advance the future as parent advocates of children with disabilities?
Well, hello again. And I really appreciate all the wonderful moms and everyone, and the males in the room, as we said before. I really appreciate everyone coming out today. So I'm also a parent, and I have also an invisible disability, and so I really want to touch powerfully today and on that issue. I'm a godmother of a daughter with disability, and so I know there are many mothers in this room. I don't do very well sitting as well, but I need to read my notes. But there are lots of mothers in this room today, and most of you I have seen with your hands raised today because you have had a child or 7 children with a disability. Yes? Yeah. And so I want to talk about you today and self-care. I want to talk about the future of having a child with disability, but also of you, each and every one of you, being an advocate for that child, and of being a parent of that child. And I want to talk about self-care because, we want to help each other to understand that if self-care is not at the top of your list, then it becomes a very, very challenging situation for the future, yes? Okay, so self-care is a human function that everyone with a vested interest must be intentional about. Self-care has to be intentional. And as a parent, as an advocate for children with disabilities, but first for yourself. If you don't make it intentional, then who are you advocating for? Because if you're not okay, can you help your child? I want you to just think for a minute that having a child with a disability, if you're not around to help that child for his present or his future, are you helping anyone? You're not. So it's really important that you put self-care at the top of your list, yes? Because it's important that you have to take care of yourself first. In today's society, the hectic lifestyles of most individuals make self-care very, very challenging. We all have jobs. We have 1 and 2 children with disabilities. We have other children in the home. We're wives, we're husbands. We have so much going on. And it's hectic 24/7. Yes? I mean, can we relate to that? So how do we find time for ourselves? How do we find time to take care of ourselves if we don't make it intentional for self-care? It's the only way for the future, and we have to both agree on that. Yes? We will come to the slide in a minute. Most mothers with children with disabilities, they lose themselves. You lose yourself in the care of that child. You lose yourself. And I just want you to know today that we just want to bring the awareness that you, as an individual, have to take care of yourself first. Every disability is different. Most of us have, as I said, 1 or 2 children that requires 24-hour care. 24-hour care. And so, for yourselves, again, you have to make it, you have to really make it so at the top of the list that you have to do everything you can to have that moment for yourself, to take care of yourself, that you will be able to be there for your child or for your children. We have some disabilities. For example, we have cerebral palsy, like my goddaughter has. We have some disability like autism. I know you'll hear a lot, because most of your children probably have those diagnoses today. Diagnoses like mental health disorders and neurological disorders, spinal injury. And those are just a few of the diagnoses that can take you as a caregiver and as a child, as a parent of a child with a disability, 24-hour care. Sometimes it never ends. Would you agree with that? I mean, if I asked to raise hands today of how much it takes to take care of one child with a disability, how many hands would go up today? Many hands will go up today. And how are you taking care of yourselves when you have so much on your plate, so much going on? How are you taking care of yourself? How is self-care at the top of your list when there is so much going on, because you want the best for your child? You're going 24/7 because you want all of the best services for your child. But you have to understand that your health has to be the priority. Because if you're not okay, then, as I said before, you can't be there for anyone else. A lot of us in the room has not just children with disabilities, but we have other able-bodied children in the home. And I want to talk about that a little bit today. We want to talk about, when you are so involved in having the right services for your child with a disability, when you have a job, how are you also taking care of those children without disabilities? Because they also need your love, they also need your attention, they also need your care, and so you have to also include them in the picture. when you are doing everything else, you have to include those children in the picture. We want to talk a little bit about, to make a conscious decision also to take care of them. So when we're looking also at your health, I want to talk a little bit about your health, your own health. You taking the time for your health. How much time do you take in a year to make your doctor's appointments, to make sure you follow up with your healthcare providers, and to do everything you can to make sure that you, as a parent, as an advocate, are physically and mentally well? How much are you doing? Let's talk a little bit about illness prevention. Do you take that time to exercise? Because exercise helps you sleep, it reduces anxiety, it reduces stress. So do you take that time, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, to exercise? Do you diet and eat well on a daily basis? Do you make that effort to do that on a daily basis? Do you take your medicine as prescribed? Because, we're running around, as I said, 24/7, and half the time we forget to take our medicine. Or we don't take it as it's supposed to be taken, as prescribed by our doctor. But it's really important for a high blood pressure medication, for a diabetic medication, for parents to be taken as prescribed self-care. We have to take care of ourselves and put that priority also on ourselves that we put on our child. Yes? We want to talk about illness behavior and things to avoid. Things like alcohol, drugs, cigarettes, sugar. We use a lot of sodas, but it's important to reduce our sugar levels or salt levels that elevates high blood pressure, for an example. Sodas and soft beverages, lack of healthy foods, too much fried food. It's important then for us to take that conscious effort to make sure that we are taking care of ourselves as mothers, as wives, as having children with disabilities, and being advocates, because self-care has to be at the top of our list. So our time is gone, but we have 1 more minute, and there was a bit to. So I just want to advance on one more point for the 1 minute we have left. Just want to let you know that self-care is critical. That you as a mother, especially again if you have a child with a disability, that you have to put self-care at the top of the list. You have to put your health at the top of the list. You have to put the same effort that you put in having the resources for your child, the same effort that you put in making sure your child is healthy and has the best resources possible. You have to put that same effort for yourself to make sure that you are well and that you will have a good future and your child will also have a good future, because without you, your child may not have the future that he or she deserves. I thank you.
Thank you, Nell. Thank you for working so hard every day to make the future a brighter and safer place and less chaotic for our children with disabilities. And most importantly, thank you for bringing up self-care. It's so important as women, as men, as caregivers, and mothers and fathers. So thank you for bringing that up. Now we're moving on to our question and answer portion. If you've written down on a piece of paper a question, Debbie is coming around and collecting them. If you haven't had a chance, you have a question, go ahead and jot that down and hold up your hand, and we'll get started in just a minute. Thank you. Okay, great. So, and if you want to specify who the question is for, you can also do that. This first question is, how do you balance self-care and a child with disability and another,
Child without one.
okay, sorry, child without one.
So, well, I'm glad you asked. You know, as I said, I'm also a parent. I have 2 adult children without disabilities, and Katrina is also my goddaughter with a disability, and I have an invisible disability. So what I do on a daily basis, I make it intentional. That means that I wake up every day. Literally, I wake up every day at 5 a.m., and I use that time to relax. I use that time to pray. If you don't pray, use that time to meditate. And I just use that time to center in before I start my day. I use the time to just center in, to settle myself before I start the day. Because when you have a child with disabilities and you have children without disabilities, you have to remember as a mother, as an advocate, that each of your children deserves the same time and effort. And so you have to be able, while you're also taking care of yourself. Because again, you have to put yourself at the top of the list. Health-wise, you have to put yourself at the top of the list in every aspect, because if you're not okay and you're not well, you can't help anybody else, right? So you have to get that parachute first. So I center in, as I said, at 5 a.m. every day. I wake up, I exercise 20 minutes, and I pray, because I'm a religious person, so I do pray. And then I take that time, sometimes 10 minutes, just to meditate and to center in on my day before I start with the children.
Thank you, Nell. And if we don't get a chance to answer all your questions, all of the panelists will be joining you in smaller group discussions later on. Our next question is for Michelle. This question is about District 75 and statistics you have about that, off the top of your head.
I don't have statistics about District 75. I can talk about District 75 and what's happening right now. Does everyone know about District 75 schools here in New York City? So, just a brief, District 75 schools are separate school spaces that look different based on the district and look different based on really the goal of the school. So sometimes those spaces are solely focused on children who have been classified with emotional disturbances, and sometimes they're spaces where students with intellectual disabilities and physical disabilities have had programs. What's happened over the past decade is that with the really the desegregation of programs and bringing more programs into the community schools, that District 75 schools have shifted. And so what we see are a lot of students being shipped, I should not say shipped, being sent to these schools. And there are people who are doing their best within these spaces, and also it's not enough. And that's what we know. And so, unfortunately, from my perspective, there isn't enough. And so these are spaces that you can either be getting a lot of resources or be getting little resources. And you might have a classroom where there are multiple different varying abilities in the space, and really maybe the teaching staff or the resources aren't there to actually support what's needed. And what I can say is that in my experience, I've had students who have come into my space coming from District 75 schools because they were relegated there because of having intellectual disabilities, because of having invisible disabilities, and no one's spending the time to really do, not no one, but not having those connections to have someone to really identify what was going on, and then access, right? Because access is a huge issue. And then also being able to talk to families. It's a huge cultural difference if you come from a country where people don't speak about disabilities. And we have a lot of different people coming from different spaces. And sometimes as a school social worker, it would take me 4 years to get a family to say, my child is living with ASD. My child is living with this. It was other things first. And so I think that's why relationships are such a huge part of the work. Thank you, Michelle.
Next, there's so many choices, so many great questions. This is actually a follow-up for you, Michelle. No. How do I manage self-care and caregiving when my community is in a food desert? It is for you, Michelle. With very limited healthy food availability. I think you actually could probably both touch on that.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can.
Do you want to start?
Yeah.
So, I work also with my local community churches. And so, what that does, some of the churches, well, the one that I actually work with specifically has food banks. And we have challenged the church to have healthy food distributed to the communities. And so a lot of the times, when you're looking at self-care, you have, as I said, you have to make it intentional. So when you go to the grocery store, I know sometimes you might be challenged to buy all sorts of different foods, right? Because healthy food, as a matter of fact, is expensive. So when you go to the store, you might be challenged to buy the chips and the pastas, let's say, for instance, not the healthy ones. A cheaper version, as opposed to buying carrots and beans. And a lot of people, in my experience, in my space, don't like to cook. And so I think, I have challenged my church to have groups, and we have taught mothers how to cook. We have taught teenagers how to cook. So when you go to the grocery store, instead of buying food that is not healthy for your body, learn how to cook the healthy food, and so you can bring it into your home. And that has helped our mothers, that has helped our teenagers to I don't know the right word to use, but to really help with this situation of self-care when you don't have a whole lot of money coming into the home. And one more thing, we have also taught the communities how to grow healthy vegetables during the summer. And so in the backyard, we have taught people how to plant healthy vegetables, and that has also helped a lot.
I mean, be a community organizer is what I hear you saying. And so food, housing, those are all issues here in New York City. And in different communities, there are community gardens. And there are some places, there used to be George's Place. Does anyone know about George's Place? And Bedside actually was a space where people who were living with different mental diagnoses lived, and on their rooftop they had a garden. And they did it as a way of actually engaging people in healing practices, but then they would sell all the food to restaurants. And so I think there are so many different things in New York City that you can access by doing a little bit of research, and also CSAs, because that's what I do in order to get access. And there are places like Slow Food and urban growing spaces that are doing that work. I saw hands raised. Do y'all have suggestions? Because just yell them out if you can.
That was my question, actually.
Oh, okay.
The issue is not, that there's not, the issue for me is my community. I'm from northern Manhattan, which is from, I'm going to say from 146th Street to 159th Street in the Harlem River Drive.
Oh, that's where my people are from. Colonial Project. Oh, that's where my family's from.
So what the issue is that we have access actually to two major stores, three now, and there's healthy food displayed that's molded, that, no, it's not edible. So, and because I've been a caregiver a long time, I've been working extra hard to try to even get the healthy food for me to prepare. So the issue is I don't know what to do because I've changed things in the home, but I don't know. And I'm more concerned too with people in my community. The kids, one of my kids has ADHD. There is a correlation with ADHD and diet and all those things. And so I'm working hard to try to find a way for for us to get the things that we need. So that's thank you.
Can we add that to one of the things that we talk about in our?
Yeah, that's a great idea, yeah. There's actually a lot of great questions that can hopefully be answered during that time, and at the end of this, there's so many good questions that we're going to pick up the Q&A then. There is a mic next to you if you want to briefly address that, or we also have a question for Donna.
I feel like we should just connect.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Okay, Donna, what are the best resources to find out about a student's right as a college student, and also how that relates to medical leave?
Microphone.
Is it
So
on?
I want to make sure that can the person who asked the question?
It's actually two questions at
Yeah, I want to
time.
make sure that I'm answering this
So
correctly.
one is about finding out the rights of a student as a college student, and someone else asked about medical leave. We'll just stick with that one, and we can pick up the other one later. How about that?
Okay, so we're talking about students with disabilities who are going to college.
Correct.
Correct. So, depending on the disability, I think certainly something that I put into place for my own child was making sure that earlier on, before college, we had an IEP in place. Most colleges these days have an office that is all about accessibility. Before your student even applies to the school, I would recommend looking online for the variety of colleges or institutions that your child is looking at to see what they do offer, and have a conversation. Give that office a call and talk to them about what kind of services do they have available that help students with disabilities to be successful in a college setting. A number of years ago, there were very few, and now many, many schools from community colleges to major universities have opportunities. There are also a lot of schools that have specific programs for kids with more significant intellectual and physical disabilities. Some of them are shorter time semesters, or where your students really have like somebody who works specifically with them. One really good site to look at is to the Institute for Community Inclusion in Boston. It's a program called Think College, and you can find Think College online, and it will give you a lot of resources and a lot of information. But I think as parents, first of all, congratulations if you're already thinking about your student going to college. That just makes me so happy, because today most students with disabilities, no matter what the disability, should be thinking about higher education. We have laws in our country that do make that available and accessible, and as I said, most schools are now really thinking about that. If you have good documentation, you've got an IEP in place, you will send it, you will have recommendations coming from your child's secondary school that will go forward, and then you would go in and meet with them. The biggest thing that you need to know, though, is you can set up all the best systems in the world, but once your student goes off to college, they're like, Mom, I'm an adult now. I don't want to get help on that, or I don't want to walk into that door. I don't want to tell the professor that I need extra time for my exam or whatnot. Well, sometimes they learn the hard way, and it means they're going to start failing their classes, and then they usually, did you want to add to that?
From experience.
Mm-hmm.
My son is now an aeronautical engineer. So,
there you go.
don't let anyone tell you, he's like that, and there's nothing you can do about it, and just, accept it. Don't ever accept any of that.
Right.
But there is a divide between what used to be called in my son's university the trio office, which was the tutoring of and the professors themselves. Doesn't mean the professor accepts or embraces that culture, particularly when you're dealing with the physics and the sciences and all that. Oh my goodness, I only want the best students. So this is where that communication with your child, not to be the helicopter parent, but sort of be the helicopter parent.
You do sort of have to be the helicopter.
And not be perceived as a helicopter parent, which is art. There's a lot of art in that. So that you support your child going through the trio,
right,
creating a good relationship, like what you said, with those allies that we all need in whatever part of our life. So it is tricky. It can be done. But speaking of self-care and having you think, 18, 17, they're off. breathe a little bit now.
No, you're never done. No, you're never done. I mean, that's,
That's okay, that's okay then.
the things to think about early on is preparing your child to be the best self-advocate that they can
So
be.
speaking of self-advocacy, we're actually having a training here for girls who are college students with disabilities next month. So if you know anyone or your own child, please let them know about our upcoming training. You can check it out on the Respectability website. And then also, Debbie wanted to just mention.
Okay, so, thank you. So we could spend the whole afternoon here, and Donna, Michelle, and Nell, thank you so much, so much. And we'll pick up on some of this, but I want to also give a shout out relative to Donna's response. Guttman Community College and its accessibility program, I mean, this is a great place to look at if you have a student transitioning into college and maybe you want to keep him or her closer to home. This is a great place and space for that. So we're going to hold on the questions because we really need to sort of keep the trains on track. And so with round of applause for our fabulous
I'm going to take about 15 minutes.
Yeah.
We have a 15-minute break, so please stand up, stretch, maybe meet someone new.
So this concludes officially the webinar component. So we want to say farewell to our webinar participants. Thank you for joining us. There's a survey online, hopefully, that you will fill out. So thank you very much. And make it a great day. And thanks to our awesome interpreter.